Welcome to New Realities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and this program is about the evolution of consciousness. And somebody who's been at this for a long, long time, who I've known for a long, long time, is Barbara Hand Clow. She is, well, an amazing astrologer, but she's been, I would say, Barbara, you've been tracking the progress of the spiritual evolution on the planet for the last, I guess, maybe 30 years or more, right?
Actually, I've been tracking it for about 75 years.
Okay.
And I'm not 120. The reason I've been tracking it is because my Cherokee grandfather put me in charge of that task. And the main book about that particular part of my data is Catastrophobia, which is now called Awakening the Planetary Mind. So I've been literally tracking the progress of the planetary evolution since I was 4 or 5 years old, when my grandfather decided to train me.
Well, you are so prolific. I mean, I have some of your books: Awakening the Planetary Mind, Astrology of the Rising Kundalini, Pleiadian Earth Energy Astrology, and the Revelations of the Ruby Crystal. Those are just a few that I have. But how many books have you written altogether?
Right around 20. I haven't really kept track. And then I've gone through lots of revisions. So, because what would happen is I put out a data bank like Catastrophobia, which was the first version of Awakening the Planetary Mind. And then so many things immediately fell into line with really radical theories that I had published that actually come from Cherokee wisdom. And so I kept having to revise things. And so I switched to fiction 10 years ago. Like The Ruby Crystal is the first book in the Revelations trilogy.
It's Native American wisdom combined with astrology, though, because that's a big part of how you look at the world.
Most Native teachers use astrology within varying degrees. I mean, all of us basically really believe in astrology. And so the only thing that's unusual about my astrological work is that I also did a lot of work in past life regression under hypnosis. And so for my graduate thesis, I did a comparison of Jungian psychoanalytic theory and past life regression under hypnosis. And the purpose of that was that Jungian psychotherapy is so expensive that I wanted to find out whether there was a way for people to get to that level of psychological depth with something that was less time consuming and therefore less expensive. And so in order to do my master's thesis, I had to do 100 sessions under hypnosis into my own past lives. Oh. So once I did that, of course, I ran into being an astrologer over and over and over again. So I definitely have some techniques in my astrological work that are coming from very, very ancient wisdom just because of past life recovery. But otherwise, I'm pretty much a conventional doctrinaire astrologer, except that haven't been doing readings for years because of the level of research. I'm more a research astrologer, historical research astrologer.
But what's your approach? Is it some people are Uranian, some people are different aspects they focus on, asteroids? Is there a particular focus of your astrology that you looked at when you look at astrology?
I use all of those techniques as part of what I do, but I always start with the nodes of the moon in order to determine what this person's soul has chosen in this lifetime. Like, why did they come here this time? So I start with trying to figure out why they're here right now and try to get a sense of the background data they have from their past lives. And then I go into a reading on a more or less conventional basis.
I love all the stuff you're doing, and no one's ever really talked about the rising Kundalini and astrology like you have.
So yeah, that's an original theory. Yeah. And the basis of astrology and the rising of Kundalini is that Uranus opposition triggers Kundalini rising in varying degrees, not necessarily total, but at least some, in all people. And this goes counter to Eastern wisdom. It goes counter to all kinds of things, that everybody gets this Kundalini rising. But I just kept finding out that's what was happening to my clients. And I also was finding that they were having a really hard time when they were rolling along in a more or less ordinary conventional life. And all of a sudden, blammo, And so that's an entirely original theory, which has now been adopted. I published that, I think, I can't remember.
This astrology book was, it says copyright 1991. This.
Yeah, there you go, way back in 1991. So that's more than 30 years now. And what has happened is almost all astrologers are using that as part of their astrological analysis. And I've never heard anybody attribute it to me. It was one of those things that was so obvious that once I noticed it and then started showing how it worked, everyone went, oh yeah, and they forgot who invented it.
Well, I'm going to do a Kundalini conference at some point. I'll invite you on there. But
Oh, let me come.
yeah, no, definitely. I want you to come to a bunch of conferences I'm doing. It's time for you to come out because you've been around so long and you know everyone, but you haven't been. Well, I haven't seen you at the expos and all these conferences that come up. So I think it's time.
Yeah, well, that would be lovely. And a lot of my work regarding being on, out there was sacred site work. So I've had 20 or 30 years of activating energies at global sacred sites. And with all the travel and with I was a publisher after all for 20 years.
Right, Bear and Company. I want to say Barbara and her husband started Bear and Company, really a major force in spiritual literature. Let me just ask you about the Uranus opposition. Opposition to what? What is it opposing?
Uranus takes 84 years to go around the sun.
Right.
So therefore, when we're somewhere between 36 and 42, 43 years old, Uranus's orbit is slightly elliptical. We get a Uranus opposing the Uranus in our chart. And when Uranus comes around at that 180-degree angle, it's just like the full moon. What it does is it kicks off all the Uranian force in our physical bodies. And so because of this differential in terms of timing, the book has charts at the end where people can look up their year and date of birth. And then you can look up and see when you actually get Uranus opposition. And this is really important. What I like people to do with this book, and this book has actually it's a funny thing, it's been quite popular and has sold a lot, but nobody knows that the person who wrote it invented the theory, which is really amusing. Right. So at any rate, I like people to read it sometime just before their Saturn return. Saturn return is when we're around 29 to 30. Well, that's easy because that's 29 to 30. It takes Saturn 29 to 30 years to go around the sun. So with Saturn return, our life's purpose comes into view, and 90% of people, if not more, make a major change at Saturn return. They get a career job, or they have a child, or they get whatever, get a divorce, whatever it is. But with Uranus opposition, not as many people do it so successfully because it's so traumatic. So the real point of this book is to really help people for that great transformational experience, which in the culture is known as midlife crisis.
Right. I was born with this Uranus opposition to my sun, my 1 degree Aquarius, in opposition to Uranus in Leo at 0 degrees Leo. So that, I think that birthed me in with a Kundalini awareness, actually, a kind of
that's a really defining aspect.
Yeah.
You have to bring out the power of Uranus with the development of yourself, for sure. And you're a real leader in the Aquarian Age because of that, as I've been also, because of aspects to Uranus. So as we go into the Aquarian Age, you and I have a lot of natural understanding of what's going on here, and we're probably teachers about how to help people comprehend what's happening.
Well, have we entered? When would you say the Aquarian Age began? I mean, of course, it's not one moment. It's like a sunrise. But what is the dates do you give for that?
Well, as you know, it's a 200 to 300 year shift.
Right.
And so for me, we start to really see just the really early vestiges of Aquarius at the end of the 19th century, as we're going into the 20th century and into the early 20th century. And then as we go through the 20th century and up at this point, now we're in the 21st century, what I was looking for was, as you know, understanding astrology, a major shift in energy gets kicked off often by a series of aspects. It takes a whole series of aspects to awaken the consciousness of the change that's actually going on. I actually think that what really popped the cork and made it impossible for people to ignore the fact that change was going on is the end of the Mayan calendar, which is 2011, 2012.
Yeah.
And of course, there's all kinds of astrological aspects that we could pick out that also kicked it off, like Uranus square Pluto right after the Mayan calendar ended. But I really think that it's incredible that the Mayans had the capacity to call that date thousands of years ago. It's always really mystified me.
Well, I think what was so important about that whole Mayan calendar, the harmonic convergence, you knew Jose Arguelles, of course, and that whole thing he started with going from the harmonic convergence in 87 and said these next 25 years will be the sort of recycling of time. And in 2012, we have a definitive movement towards the new age, whatever you want to call this, is what he kind of said. But I think what it did mostly was gear us towards a galactic understanding, because we were no longer just solar based, we were galactic based with the 2012 awareness. So
yes, I think that's absolutely true. I think that shift to actually being sensitized to the influence of the galaxy just suddenly became very prominent, didn't it?
right.
It just was unavoidable. And that's why I like terms like the Galactic Maya, because the Maya definitely are galactic teachers to us on planet Earth. And then there's also that issue of the photon band, which came through in the Pleiadian agenda. Other people have also talked about the photon band a lot. But that 25-year period that you're talking about is actually the period when our sun really went fully into the photon band. And then once we went fully into the photon band, that's our sun, then what happens is the planets are in and out as they're going around the sun. And so it took a number of years for also the whole solar system to be in the photon band, which we are at this time. And on your screen, you look like you're in the photon band.
Is it too distracting? Well, I feel like I've been in the photon.
No, I'm enjoying it because it's like, I'm seeing all these photons, photon light going off.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I was just
well, I was just going to say, and because of that quality of the photon band, which makes us multidimensional, this issue of 9 to 11 dimensions, which is how our brain actually functions. So many people just have no idea what's going on. And so I just spend most of my time just trying to help people just be on the earth and be grounded on the earth plane, because we're becoming multidimensional so fast that people just don't know where they are.
We are becoming multidimensional. I mean, that's like sort of become a mainstream word, Yeah. There's a new book out by some of the disclosure people. If you've been following the UFO disclosure drama that's unfolding since 2017.
Sure.
There's a book out called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon that just came out, which is talks about the government's investigations into what they call the paranormal, but really the existence of multidimensional realities is what they're looking at in a really mainstream way.
Yeah, and I'd like to say skinwalkers. I love that term.
Navajo term. Yeah, it's a Navajo, but it's kind of a creepy term, isn't it? It's like a sort of.
It's a creepy term in the past when people just didn't really realize something was going on, but there is something going on, whether you like it or not. And the skinwalker term has to do with that sense of walking in other dimensions, which is not really a negative thing at all. But if people get broken open too quickly or too fast, or have no way of comprehending what's going on, then a term like that might feel like it's negative. It doesn't feel negative to me, but I can see.
But let's talk about your work, because it's so important. And what's your latest book called?
Revelations from the Source, Revelations from the Ruby Crystal, Revelations from the Aquarian Age is the second book. Came out in 2018. Right. And Revelation from the Source is just hitting Amazon and the stores now.
What do you go to in that book? What is that book so important? Because I think it is.
It's important to me because I achieved my lifetime goal. My lifetime goal always was to write a great novel. And it just been my goal that I never was able to pay. I wasn't able to pay attention to it until I was 70. And
Wow.
so the first book, Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, is about all of the characters and all of the people. It mostly takes place in Rome and in Italy and somewhat in the United States. But there's a timeline going all the way through all three books of the Vatican and issues in Rome and politics in the United States. So all the way through this trilogy, we have a timeline operating from 2011 to 2021. The first book is just the stories of the characters. There's a couple of love stories, the usual stuff in fiction, because if you're going to write a trilogy, you've got to really build the characters. So then once the characters were really built and constructed, and most importantly, once they live for people, and people tell me that they are living for people, because most New Age nonfiction writers who try to write fictions, they miss the fact that you got to have great characters.
Absolutely right. That's what's been so awful with New Age literature. It's just been concepts and spiritual ideas, and there's no real substantial person to hold on to, which you need if you're reading any sort of book. You need somebody to relate to, or else it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, you need to get really hooked on the story of that person and that group of characters.
Right.
And so then the second book, Revelations of the Aquarian Age, develops the way time is changing. First of all, there's the characters in their milieu and in their lives. But then we start seeing them almost in a movie level of progression, where they're moving through their lives and things are starting to happen. And that Revelations of the Aquarian Age covers 2015 through 2018. And that period of time was just when a whole lot of us were starting to realize, something's really going on here, especially when someone like Donald Trump showed up.
Right. Yeah.
So we start rocketing through time. And then in Revelations from the Source, we have the actual ascension of these characters. And this is in the middle, this is 2018 to 2021. So this is in the middle of COVID-19. This is in the middle of lockdown.
You're writing about COVID and the pandemics and all.
In the third book, yeah. Of course, in the first two books, it hadn't appeared yet.
Right. But how do you define ascension, at least in that book? Because everyone has their own idea about ascension and.
Yeah, right. Okay. What I do is these are characters, these are people that you know. This could be your best friend. These characters are so much more interesting than anybody else who is around me. I probably would have been willing to socialize with you, but I just couldn't stand talking and spending my time with people who weren't interested in astrology, weren't interested in cosmic issues, weren't interested in ascension. And when I say ascension, I mean taking themselves upwards so that they are living their soul right in this lifetime. That's what ascension is to me. Ascension is having your soul embodied in your lifetime and living from a soul perspective. Right. So these characters are really highly developed people. We have a great Jungian analyst named Lorenzo Giannini. We have a New York Times reporter who's really brilliant, who's married to a church expert in theology. And we have these wonderful Italian, I use a lot of aristocrats, Ellen. And the reason I wrote about aristocrats in this trilogy was because often they have a tremendous amount of free time and can really pursue alchemy and development of the self. And one of the characters is Alessandro de' Medici. So we have the de' Medici Renaissance theme coming in. But the ascension in the third book has to do with all of the characters going to the highest level of consciousness. And it's a really amazing thing, because one of the characters, a guy named Armando Pierleoni, a painter, he was basically as satanic as you can get in the beginning in Ruby Crystal. But by the time we get to the third book, he has fallen in love, become a father, and become a really, really well-rounded person. And then he starts painting these incredible paintings that actually start causing people in Florence, where he's located. Yeah, he's in the Uffizi. he is actually showing people high levels of consciousness right in his paintings, almost like Salvador Dali. He's at a really high level.
Do you have an idea of what those paintings actually look like, or you just describe them? But are there actually images that you see?
You really came up with a good one. I think I put the worst task I could have ever put on one of my children. Liz Clow is my fourth child, and she's my daughter, my only daughter. And Liz Clow actually had to paint. She did illustrations for the book that show you what Armando is doing. And even she said she doesn't paint his paintings. You could tell from the book that if you went to the Uffizi and saw one, it wouldn't be quite like the one that you see in the book. But
Right.
Lizzie, I call her,
Right.
actually managed to paint at this level, at that level, this really high level of ascension consciousness. So in the third book is a rocket ship. And I think most importantly, it shows great people dealing with reality once the lockdown set in. If anybody really wants to know what I actually think is going on here with the virus, read this book.
There needs to be another book, obviously, right? Because we're just in the middle of this whole passageway into something else unknown.
I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know whether I'll go back to nonfiction and write about, maybe I'll write about viruses. But
Right.
what I'm trying to say is it's obvious what we have to do. And so that could be enough.
Right. But I just want to ask you about characters, because I was a literature major, and were they coming to you as real beings? Were they coming out of your mind? Were they people based on people you know? Where'd you get these, very alive characters from?
Well, as a literature major, do you love Anthony Trollope?
Well, I haven't studied. I study a lot of James Joyce. So, and
Okay, so a lot of James Joyce. Well, James Joyce will do too, but it just so happens that Anthony Trollope, who wrote 60 major works of unbelievable fiction, he actually got his characters the same way I did. Although I didn't know when they came that I found out when I read, an analysis of the way he wrote, I found out what happened to him. So what happened was in 2010, I decided to let nonfiction go. And I decided to write fiction. And I can assure you that my publisher was not happy. This is known as one of the deadliest moves that you could make in publishing. And I was an acquisitions editor for 20 years.
right.
I never would have advised anybody to do what I was going to do. But I figured since I was 70, it was my time. So I went into my writing studio, which is filled with crystals and all sorts of magical objects. And I sat down and I said, okay, I'm going to write fiction. How am I going to do this? Immediately the Pleiadians came in, like they usually do. And they're just my muse. They're my guides. Sometimes I think the Pleiadians are my higher self. Doesn't matter what they are. They said, get out a yellow pad and a pen and start writing. They gave me the names and the ages and the profession and the background and the family structure of all of the characters except one. And this book covers 3 generations. We have grandparents, we have young to medium age adults, and we even have some grandchildren. So it's it's a fairly complex structure, but because it's only a few families, most people don't find, some books like that just drive me crazy. But this one is actually written in such a way that it's very, very understandable. And so there I was 3 hours later with a couple of legal pads filled with all the writing. I went into the kitchen. My husband was in the kitchen cooking lunch. And I said, guess what just happened? And I described the characters to him and told him what was happening. And he did the most amazing thing, Ellen, because it's the first time he's ever done it. Jared never liked the stuff that I could write, that I was writing. He couldn't figure out what I was talking about. Jerry was Mr. Bear, El Presidente Bear Company. And he ran the company, and he was more or less a businessman with a lot of, he's an Aquarian, and I'm an Aquarian, so a lot of affinity. But he looked at me, he said, you have to write this. And I went, what? After, I finished with some description of something, and he would say, Chiron? Or he'd say, Kundalini? What are you talking about? And he just said, you have to do this. You have to tell the story. Right. And so that's how they came in. They came that way. And it turns out they're all fragments of me, of course. In good fiction, the characters are always fragments of the writer.
Or they may be dimensional beings that exist on some level that you're tapping into, right? I mean, that's also the possibility that these are somehow consciousnesses that you're picking up.
I mean, like, for example, you're a multidimensional being living in Earth life, and so am I. So right. So then regarding that aspect of it, and I'm so glad you mentioned that. After I got the first maybe 20 chapters written, I reached a total impasse with Armando Pierleone. Now, Armando Pierleone at that point was a rakish Italian painter who was basically abusing every woman in sight, etc. He was a really bad guy. And my daughter Lizzie had said, Mom, I'm a really nice person, okay? I'm happily married. I'm a nice mom. I lead a nice life. But Lizzie said, forget all of that. Make him as bad as you can make him. So I did. But then I reached chapter 20 and I didn't know what the hell to do with him. And so then I had an amazing apparition. Lorenzo Giannini, the best Jungian analyst in Rome, and he's modeled after somebody, of course, appeared in the room and said, I have been doing analysis with Armando for 10 years now, and I'm sick of him. And if you're going to ever figure this guy out, and if he's ever going to go to the next level, you're going to have to work with me. So all the way through the rest of the trilogy, Lorenzo Giannini, the analyst, is analyzing people, taking them into past lives, taking them into life between lives, taking them all the way through the levels of consciousness that we as humans can embody. And so the book is teaching about what all of us are capable of. All of us can do this. It's just a matter of whether you want to or not.
So when in the finale of this third part, you bring them all, the characters, to this point of awakening, in a sense, right? You bring them, and do you feel that that's the potential that can happen to us as we kind of pass through this darker time?
Yeah, you're putting that in a really interesting way, because there's some things about it I don't really understand. But what I did was I put not all of the characters, the main characters, into a ceremony in a place called Sintra, Portugal, which is a really, really amazing sacred site with an amazing temple. And what happens is those characters all go through a ceremony that I carried out globally on the earth during this lifetime for 30 years, which is called a Pleiadian agenda activation. Because once the Pleiadian agenda came in, the only way I could really teach those levels was to take people into ceremony. So this book has an authentic, deep portrayal of that 9 to 11 dimensional ceremonial, it's a multidimensional contact. And so far, people reading it are telling me that they just go right into the ceremony and they do the ceremony. People are saying that, and it was terribly, terribly hard to write it, as you can imagine.
In that ceremony, they reach a place of awakening.
They reach a place of awakening with the central core of the earth itself in relationship to the galaxy. It's in other words, any great ceremony that we conduct on earth is an earth awakening. So it's a real earth awakening of consciousness. And then once that was done, then I realized I had achieved my goal. Now, remember what my goal was? To write a great novel.
Right.
Because the tricky thing about novels is to have the middle part not fall into the mud and have the final part of the book, especially a trilogy, pulling everything together. And so I achieved it at that point, but then I also had to write an afterword that would take us way beyond that ceremony and actually probably into the next few hundred years of consciousness.
And that's what you do in the afterword to the book.
Yeah, so there's a short afterword with Alessandro de Medici after that ceremony that puts this into context, because when you go to an amazing ceremony like that and you have an amazing experience, like, where does it fit in? And
Wow.
so then I went into what that fits into.
Have you thought of making this into a film, a movie, selling the rights to that? The trilogy?
This would be one of the most amazing movies. And I often wish that I knew James Cameron, because I think he would probably love to put this into a film.
Well, do you have anyone working on that, selling the option? No.
I've never had an agent for any book or anything.
I'm going to see what, if I can talk to, I mean, not that I'm not connected to that field, but it sounds like it would be a great book because
I think the whole trilogy would be a great film.
Because there's a lot of very poorly done spiritual movies out there that don't really, like you said about novels, they don't have a center. They may have, and they don't have the character development that is needed.
People mysteriously, and I won't make any accusations, but things appear a few years after one of my books come out that in film that are definitely like what the bleak do I know in relationship to alchemy of 9 dimensions.
Well, yeah, I was thinking of that film, which wasn't really a great film. It had great ideas, but it didn't have any real depth of characters. But the ideas.
Happy to see somebody do something, you know. And then 2 years after Ruby Crystal is a major exposure of the depths of sexual abuse, priestly sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. Yeah, see that lightning bolt on the top of the Vatican?
Yes. Yes.
Did you know that when Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, stepped down and they elected the moment that he stepped down, 2 big lightning bolts struck the Vatican.
You know, I think I did see that. That was so, what do you think? Was that a negative thing?
I don't know. It certainly indicated a lot of energy coming from somewhere pretty high up and going right through the Vatican. But that's a photograph. People were out there with their cameras, zooming. I mean, not zooming.
Yeah, I saw a picture of that lightning striking the Vatican, which is
it's on the cover of the book.
Wow.
Yeah. So I really went after priestly sexual abuse. Then right 2 years after that, trying to remember the name of this film. I'm probably not going to be able to.
Oh yeah, the one that was made, and yeah, I remember that film that you're talking about that was made in Hollywood about the abuse.
Yeah, and I wish I could remember the name because it's a good movie. It's showing a priest and his life and all that, but it's exactly the same content as Ruby Crystal. So that's what's happened so far. I think people have been very inspired, and I honor them for it. I really don't believe that I own something. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I do my best to create something and describe it, but I don't think I own it.
Let's talk a little bit about your other work. The Pleiadian agenda was so important and kind of geared to people towards the awareness of the Pleiadian presence. You want to talk about that and that whole connection to those realms? Of course, you helped produce Barbara Marciniak's book about the Pleiades. I mean, you published that. So talk about the Pleiadian presence.
Okay. Well, in my universe, the reason the Pleiadians have such an impact on us is that I feel, and I know from indigenous teaching, or Cherokee teaching, that the Pleiadians have really been involved with Earthlings during the Paleolithic age, especially the last 100,000 years. And this is the period of our evolution where we developed art and it began to show evidence for the soul in the human body. Right. And so the Pleiadians are very, very deep guides for us. I think they probably have visited here. It probably come here. I don't really know too much about that. I don't know what to say about that. You're much more of an expert than I am.
Well, you're in touch with something. Maybe whether they're here or not, you're in touch with that level of consciousness. So you can talk about that. Yeah.
And it's the Pleiadian level of consciousness has to do with the open heart, especially has to do with the care for the children. And so I'm a pretty typical, well, first of all, Ellen, when I grew up and was trained by my grandfather, I was taught that I was from the Pleiades. So my fundamental understanding of myself as a child was that I had come here from the Pleiades to be on the earth. And I got into real trouble in the first grade when the teacher asked each one of the children to say where they come from. And of course, I said the Pleiades. And that started my troubles that went all
Wow.
the way through school. Yeah, that was, I wish my grandfather told me not to say that, but he just taught me that's where I was from. I feel that. I feel as much on the Pleiades as I do here.
So what's the Pleiadian agenda going back all those years you wrote that book? I mean, what would you say their agenda is for us, Earthlings?
Their agenda has definitely been to open us up to multidimensional consciousness and also to prepare us for the end of the Mayan calendar. So they had a really big job going on with this, and you can see it with all the Pleiadian channels through the 80s and 90s and up to the end of the Mayan calendar. And they're still present here and still involved here, but not like that movement, that incredible movement, just breakout of Pleiadian wisdom.
Right. The 2012 movement towards a galactic awareness was that whole Pleiadian kind of framework, right? Would you say?
And
But
other extraterrestrial influences too, but certainly the Pleiadians are a very strong influence.
what does the astrology look like planetarily? Where are we going as 21 to 2022 and beyond? And you also had other ET kind of aspects. So where do you feel like, I mean, I know you write about it in the afterword of the book, but what can you give us a little taste of where you think we're going?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to imprint right now, and I really want to know if you agree with this,
Okay.
is we've had 3 squares of Saturn and Uranus this year. The first one was like February, and then there was one in June, and the last one is Christmas Eve on December 24th. And in the book itself, I do cover quite a bit of astrology, by the way, in Source. I get into the transits in 2019, 2020, because of Saturn conjunct Pluto and because of the Capricorn transits.
Saturn conjunct Pluto, is this the whole COVID
Yeah.
crisis? Whatever the source of that was, that's up. That's the Saturn Pluto?
That's covered in the book. Claudia Tagliati, the lover of the Jungian analyst, is a great astrologer, and of course, a fragment of me.
Right.
And so she was watching like a hawk in the latter part of Source for what was going to happen in January 2020, because with astrology, we can predict when something is going to happen. We can predict the quality of that. So with Saturn conjunct Pluto in Capricorn, it had to do with a fundamental like completion of a long-term structural format on planet Earth. And then it had to do with something happening to break that whole structural format wide open. That's what we knew, and that's what Claudia knew.
Wait, so wait, those breaking it open was the Saturn Pluto? Is that what broke the structure open? Was the Pluto with Saturn?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So January 14th, Saturn conjuncted Pluto, just when we got the reports on the early cases in Wuhan. So at that point, Claudia then knew, and I knew, and you probably knew also, that that was going to be the theme, that it was going to have to do with viruses and pandemics and global issues with public health and stuff like that. Then there's another thing to insert in here. The other thing that I watch really closely is when Saturn conjuncts Jupiter every 20 years. And we astrologers all watch for Saturn conjunct Jupiter. And so with Saturn conjunct Jupiter, we have a thing called a trigon, which is every 20 years, which affects economics and politics.
And war, there seems to be a war every 20 years too. I mean, would you say that's connected to that?
Well, I would say that the last trigon, 2000 to 2020, I've always called that the Bush trigon.
Right.
Because George Bush got in and then took off with all the wars in the Middle East.
Right.
But as we go further into Aquarius, and the book really fleshes this out regarding why war is going to have to end during the age of Aquarius. And it has a lot of information about how we got stuck in war during the age of Aries, which is like 100 BC to 2200 BC.
Right.
And then the age of Pisces became wars for God for 2000 years. In other words, instead of that Aryan war ending, it just got worse because then they attributed everything to Yahweh and God and blammo again. And it has to end during Aquarius. One thing we know is the ecology of our planet can't take it anymore. And everybody knows that, and we're going to have to find our way out of it. So the Bush trigon from 2000 to 2020 is the last trigon in Earth. In this case, it was in Taurus. And then once we get to the trigon that's covered in the book, so the trigon is a big deal in source also, and Claudia's like watching to see what it means and all this kind of stuff. Then we're in air, and the trigon from 2020 to 2040 is an air trigon, when I think that war will be extremely decreased on this planet. And so now I'm calling this trigon, with this covered in source, I'm calling it the virus trigon.
And that's another war. That is sort of a world war on another level. I mean,
yeah, it's a world war on the second dimension, because in my system, first dimension is the center of the Earth. Second dimension is the world of microbes and viruses below the crust of the Earth. Then we're on the surface of the Earth in 3D. So we're living on the surface on 3D, and the scientists have decided we're just going to eradicate all the viruses. And so they've come up with all these vaccines and all kinds of what they think are wonderful technologies. And we won't even go into it.
We don't have to.
I'm not an expert in it, so we'll just leave it alone. Okay. But I'm calling this trigon the virus trigon.
2020 to the 2040 decades, this score of time, will be that shift and more. And would you say? Yeah.
So let's go back to this year.
Yeah.
Which is okay. So get the Saturn conjunct Pluto in early 2020. Then we get the trigon at the end of 2020. And so you had this tremendous infusion of a whole new structural order that we don't see until we start living it out. So then we have 2021 this year. And this is the important message. The Saturn Aquarius squaring Uranus and Taurus. We had the first one in February. We had the second one in like August, and we're getting the third one right before Christmas. So that Saturn square Uranus is a structural tension between making a new structure and taking the whole structure and tearing it apart. It's a tremendously nervous energy of struggle between making a structure and then revolution and tearing it all to pieces. And so this is
happening in Aquarius, though, the square Uranus in Aquarius.
Yeah, Saturn's in Aquarius.
Right.
But Uranus is in Taurus.
Right.
So then if you look at it that way, Uranus is uncomfortable in Taurus. Uranus wants to break out and go, and Taurus wants steady, keep it cool, right?
Right.
Then with Saturn is uncomfortable in Aquarius, because Saturn wants to make the structure and Aquarius wants to tear it up. Right. So this is the reason that 2021
has been horrible and uncomfortable, and everyone's uncomfortable. Yes.
Everybody's uncomfortable. Anybody notice? But I think it's been more uncomfortable for us because it's been personally uncomfortable.
Yes.
We're experiencing Saturn square Uranus in our personal reality, in our personal level of creation. And it's just been incredibly uncomfortable. But you know what I noticed on October 10th? That stuff is starting to leak out of this. So it's starting to balance, and it has to balance, because you can't have a situation where globally all the information is on one side of the fence. Right. Let's just leave it at that. I think as we come up to this third square, all the way through this fall and up to Christmas Eve, with the third square, I think there's going to be more and more revelation and information about the whole dynamic instead of only part of it.
Is the third square still Saturn in Aquarius, Uranus, and Taurus? Is that still the same?
Yeah, the third square, the third one is December 24th.
Okay.
So I think we're in the middle of, it's almost like we're in the middle of an alchemical annealing furnace, would be a way to put it. Each of us personally. And what it has done is it has really caused a lot of us to grow tremendously. I see tremendous growth in people. Even if what I see is insane resistance to looking at anything, I can see growth.
Well,
Well,
where does 2022 bring us then?
To tell you the truth, I haven't looked much beyond. I've been mainly staying in this range of time right now. Sometime next year, after I finish promoting this trilogy, I'm probably going to do some more astrological analysis.
Because it seems like it sort of opens up then. It seems like, after, I mean, just my feeling is it kind of the hard part's we've been through the hard part, and now I think new ideas, new technologies, new possibilities have been created because of that alchemical furnace, the friction that
Yeah.
that is so obvious. The friction is what we've been through,
Yeah. And as the new technologies come in, and they're all extremely important to us. Right now, we're facing a threat of just an incredible amount of control and invasion of privacy. And so there's going to be a big struggle over whether the technologies are going to serve us as people or whether they're going to be agents of control by the elite. Right. And as you know, the US gets its Pluto return in February. I don't remember the exact date. But that means that Pluto is in 27 Capricorn in the 1776 USA chart, where the United States came together as the United States. And we get our first Pluto return next year. And so the only thing I can say about 2022 is the US is going to be the theater of the global craziness because of what's happening in the US itself. Because the US is going to be tremendously challenged in 2022 to even hold together. Very, very challenging.
Well, what about some people are predicting some of that Uranus movement is actually bringing in more the presence of ETs. Are you getting something about that as well?
That's a great segue. I think what you are probably waking up to, no, you already know, and I'm waking up because I haven't paid too much attention to contact and all, just because of all the stuff that I do. But it's real clear to me that about 95% of what actually goes on in our economy and governments can actually be better understood by understanding extraterrestrial influence. And so I think in 2022, with that Pluto return, I'm looking forward to some revelations regarding extraterrestrial influence. And Alan, the most important one to me is the story of Serpo. And I don't know what you think about that story.
I don't know. Tell what story is this? The people when they went to that
Journey to Serpo.
Right, where those people went and spent time on that planet. Some people say it was true. Other people say it wasn't true. I don't know if it was a true story. What do you think?
That's what I was going to say. Len Kasten is the one who wrote the best book on Serpo, as far as I'm concerned, called Journey to Serpo. And I think what he tells us there is true. He goes through all of the actual facts about the journey and all the incredibly rich data bank of what was going on between filmmakers and Star Trek and Close Encounters. And he really does a beautiful job of showing how we've actually been shown what's really been going on for the last 20 or 30 years in film. And that filmmakers were actually given the data by the government, such as Spielberg. And so Close Encounters is a movie about the journey to Serpo.
Oh, it is. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the ending of it. Yes, is about. But it was kind of a disastrous journey.
You think it's easy to take what happened was supposedly under Eisenhower, supposedly 10 astronauts were selected because the Serpo people wanted to send a spaceship to the Earth in order to take them to Serpo so they could be on Serpo for 10 years. Right. So these 10 or 12 astronauts went there, and 3 of them died during the course of being there. And 2 of them decided to remain when it was time to come back. So supposedly there's 2 of them still living on Serpo. And then the rest of them got back and got their minds wiped at one of the military facilities. Now, Alan, if this is true, that our government was actually involved in training American citizens to be astronauts and take a journey to Serpo,
Mhm.
we have the right to know about this.
Well, that's just one of the things we have the right to know. There's a lot we have the right to know. And
There's a huge thing beyond that, but actually being involved in sending our people, that's really hits core.
I met Len Cast, and I wasn't sure if I believed everything he had to say, but we didn't talk about the journey.
His information regarding all the other levels and Antarctica and bases on Mars and all is very dark.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about the Mars stuff.
Yeah, no, it's very dark. It's very dark. But the journey to Serpo is an entirely different, although in order to do that journey, our government would have had to have had these involvements with Mars and Antarctica.
Right.
It's all one piece, but it's the compelling nature of people can imagine a lot when they start to try to think of themselves as being one of those astronauts.
But just separate from all that, what do you get about the ET agenda now and the Pleiadian agenda, like just psychically when you open up?
I'm pretty optimistic. I think that a lot of things that are going on, I tend to be an optimist, number one, and I think the Pleiadians are very optimistic.
Yes.
And when you get into some of these other data banks, some of the other extraterrestrial influences, particularly the reptilians, it's more difficult.
Well, my book is very optimistic. My Making Contact book. It's a very hopeful. In a way, it's a narrative. There it is. It's a narrative of sorts. It's a collection of essays, but I've tried to take the best in the field and kind of show the progression from looking at the phenomena from an external nuts and bolts to an internal consciousness level. So I have an essay. I have an essay by John Mack in there, a previously unpublished essay.
And John Mack is one of my favorites. I mean, in terms of helping us understand the psychological levels that go on with extraterrestrial issues, John Mack, his work has always been one of my favorites.
Right, and Whitley Strieber has a chapter in there, and Moulton Howe, who actually had just read a book about the Serpo expedition. She told me. And anyway, I'll send that to you, or we'll work on it.
And I think this is all really great because I do think this is really opening up. Like I was amazed by Marco Rubio last year, just opening up the can of worms. And I've been watching, for example, you could say nothing happened, no disclosure happened. Well, I'll give you one example. It caused me to go back and read all of my extraterrestrial books, John Mack, etc., plus many more. Just to rethink, like, what do I really think? And I think last year, a lot of people did a lot more thinking about this issue, including you writing a book.
Right. And the book's done well because of the government exposure and the people in there. Darryl Anka wrote a chapter as himself.
One of my favorites also. And I'll tell you, we're getting close to the end here, so I'll just tell a funny Darryl Anka story.
Tell me.
I was teaching with Darryl and like a bunch of people, Barbara Marcinia, a bunch of new age people.
Because you're a channel yourself. I mean, you
at a conference on Crete, and I didn't do very many channeling conferences. I've rarely channeled in public. I mostly just use it for my background data bank. But we were all sitting there. We were in a total altered state, up 5 of us, transmitting all this really amazing information. I'm just trying to remember another guy who was there because it's a guy you probably pretty love. But at any rate, finally somebody in the audience said, well, would you just tell me when the extraterrestrials are going to come? And Darryl Anka just said, well, what do you think is going on right up here at this table? It is going on. It is part of our reality all the time.
It is. That is a good point, Barbara. You're right. I mean, we're waiting for the extraterrestrials, and they're talking to us loud and clear. And this is what's going on. I do a predictions conference every year for the Open Center. Maybe you could be in the 2022 what's
Yeah.
coming as astrologer. It's usually in
Yeah.
January.
Sure, I could consider that. Yeah.
I'll let you know about that. That's also what the whole Aquarian thing has opened up. The whole Zoom communication is very
Yeah.
Aquarian.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I love Zoom, by the way. I
Yeah.
mean, I can really feel you're right here in my house. It's fun.
Well, I'm going to be in New Mexico. Actually, maybe you could come to this other conference, Human Origins Conference. So you might, if you're there in May, that would be great to come down to Albuquerque to do the Human Origins, because I think I think it's time for you to come out and speak. I mean, you've been hiding, you've been writing books, but you know, you've been tracking this, like I said in the beginning of the interview. So you've been tracking the awakening of consciousness. That's why I'm sure you started Bear and Company, because you wanted, you know, people to have access to books, and you published some very important books there. I mean,
speaking of that last comment, Darryl Anka, did you see his wonderful picture book where he did on all the levels of
I think I have it. The one he did the illustrations for.
He did the illustrations. He did it with a woman writer, a really wonderful woman
writer. Yes, I actually have that book.
That's it. Beyond My Wildest Dreams with Darryl Anka, and then the woman is
Kim Carlsberg.
Yeah, Kim Carlsberg. Yeah.
And of course, it's published by Bear and Company out of Santa Fe.
They were wonderful authors to work with, and I just love Darryl Anka. And it's wonderful because, like John Mack, it shows the levels that you go through psychologically as you start to deal with your own extraterrestrial.
Yeah, he really captured some of these great images back then.
I don't even know if it's in print anymore. I think it is. I hope it is.
I don't know if it is in print, but it is so I didn't realize Darryl did all these illustrations.
Aren't they wonderful?
They really encapsulate the phenomena.
Yeah.
And you know what? He is
I know the other person who was on that panel.
Who?
Talk about boot. Kevin Ryerson.
What happened to him?
He's still around. I think he's just probably living reclusively. I don't know. I haven't contacted him for a while.
I know Shirley MacLaine put him on the map years ago with that book, but and she's still around. Shirley, you ever run into her?
She's here in Santa Fe. As far as I know, she's here in Santa Fe.
Right. So Kevin Wright, all those people have made a big impact on the time we're in now.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Darryl is a great guy. He's still at it. He's still channeling. He's still bringing in very high level information.
Yes,
his movie First Contact. Did you see that movie he did about 2 or 3 years ago?
That's really good.
Excellent movie. Barbara, so what's next for you though, personally? What's your next project?
Here's what I intend. I want Source to succeed as Dan Brown has succeeded. Not because I don't care about money yet. None of that stuff matters to me. I want lots and lots of people to read this book. And so unlike in the past, as soon as I got a book done, I would go right on and write the next one and not promote the book that just came out, which wasn't smart. This time I want to make this book happen. I want to make it go to the level that it should go to. This is 10 years of work, and it needs to come to the level that it needs to come to.
So okay. So I'll tell some other podcasters about you. And
okay.
Are you doing?
I am going to be doing astrology updates periodic. I've got 3 or 4 astrology shows that I do, and I'll make sure I let you know when I'm ready. What happens is I take a week or 2 to just master a body of material, because you know how complex astrology is. You can't do it.
Well, on the level you're doing it, it's very deep, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, and you also knew my friend Guru Jagat, didn't you? From
Yes, I'm so sad. I just am so sad. My last interview with her was in December this last year, and it's incomprehensible.
I know.
I don't understand how this could have happened.
I don't either. She was in another so vital, alive. I knew her since she was 19.
Remarkable woman. Now she is working with us from the other side, you know. Like I have an altar here for her that I'm working with here, because she's incredibly important. person.
Well, I'll send you a medium reading about what she's doing. My friend did, but
oh, I'd love to have that.
I've been talking to Barbara Hand Clow, the author of the new book, Revelations from the Source, Inner Traditions, Bear and Company. Get it. It's a very important book about the present and the future and the evolution of the kind of spiritual awakening we are undergoing at this moment in time. So, Barbara, how can people find you and reach you?
My website is handclow2012.com.
Great.
And lots of people follow that. Your interview, for instance, will be on there. What I do is I just post interviews on it, do updates occasionally. And then, of course, my books are available all over the place and on Amazon.
Thank you, Barbara, for all your 75 years, 70 years of work anyway.
No, at this point, I'm going to be 79. I'm getting there.
All right. However, whatever it is, you're fine. You're still going strong. So.
Well, thank you, Alan. It was a joy to meet with you again.
Thank you. Sound Steinfeld for New Realities. Thank you for watching.